Hello and welcome to Embedded Databases for Mobile Apps, Stress-Free Solutions with InterBase. For this webinar, the microphones will be muted, but we are taking questions. Just type them in the question panel in GoToWebinar, and we'll do our best to answer them at the end. We're also recording today's session, and you'll receive a link in the email to watch the replay later. My name is Jim McKeeth. I'm Chief Developer Advocate and Engineer here for Embarcadero Technologies. Joining me later on is Mary Kelly. She's the InterBase Engineer and a RAD software consultant. And she really is an InterBase techie, fantastically knowledgeable. So great to have her joining me today. Our agenda today, we're going to do a quick introduction to InterBase, InterBase to Go, IB Lite, and then talk about why you would choose to embed a database, kind of what the different types of databases are, what the advantages of embedded databases. Then we're going to look at mobile applications with embedded InterBase. At this point, Mary Kelly will take over and she'll explain mobile syncing between client and server and everything you need to know about change views. At the end, we're going to wrap things up with a live Q&A. So now let's do a quick InterBase overview. InterBase is a highly scalable, powerful, embeddable, and encryptable database that works across many different platforms, including iOS and Android, one of the few databases that does run natively on mobile platforms. It's very lightweight, small footprint, so it's quick and fast and doesn't really bog down your system. One of the things that sets it apart is zero administration, being that you can deploy it and you don't need to administer it and maintain it. It just self-optimizes and keeps running on its own. As far as understanding where InterBase positions itself, you kind of need to look at the different types of databases there are. Traditionally, we think of server databases. These are databases that run on a remote server like Oracle, SQL Server, etc., that you connect to from a client machine. We also have desktop databases. These are databases that run on your local computer, like Microsoft Access, FileMaker, Paradox. And then the other type of databases you see a lot is embeddable databases. These are like SQLite, and these are databases that are embedded right inside your application itself. Now, of course, server databases could be on your server or somebody else's server, aka the cloud, and that's important as well. InterBase handles all these scenarios. It's kind of the best of all these different scenarios. It can run as a server database, it can run as a desktop databases, or it can be embedded. All these databases are using the same core engine and also use the same data files. So you could move a data file between the different types of databases that you'd be looking for. Embed, deploy, and relax is kind of the InterBase mantra. The idea being that you can not only be productive and get a lot done, but that you don't have to keep stressing about maintaining your database. This makes it ideal for situations where you're going to embed it and not have to maintain it. For example, NASA used it in their Mars rover because you can't ship a DBA to Mars. Also, InterBase is really focused on Internet of Things in the enterprise. We recently won an award, the Internet of Things Award, for most innovative use of data. Now, today, I'll be talking about Delphi and C++ Builder with InterBase, but it's important to know that InterBase works with all major development paradigms. So whatever you're using, you can find a way to use it with InterBase. InterBase comes in 4 different flavors. The base flavor is the free IB Lite. This is a great embeddable database that is completely free to use. It is limited in that you can only have a 100 megabyte database size, which for an embedded, especially on mobile, is a fairly large database, and it doesn't have encryption. The great thing about it is that if you later decide you need to upgrade to encryption and the full InterBase to go, it's directly upgradable. All it is a license file change, and then you get strong encryption, multiple CPUs, multiple connections, and change views, which we're going to talk about later, which are an amazing feature that make InterBase very, very useful, especially in mobile devices. From there, the next version up is the desktop edition, which is where you're going to install on your Windows desktop, and it's accessible from any local application. It has all the features of IB to go, with strong encryption and such, but is designed to be ran on your desktop. The final version is InterBase Server. This is all the features designed for many users to be connected simultaneously. It's running on a remote machine, and you connect to it remotely to access it and have your database. It adds, in addition to the ability to run remotely, journaling and journal archives. So yeah, I'm talking a lot, but you don't have to take my word for how great InterBase is. These are a couple quotes from some of our customers about how much they love InterBase. These are through Tech Validate, so it's a third party that collects these and then can validate that they are, in fact, quotes by who they say they're by. But this is just one sample of many people that love InterBase and are incredibly excited to be using it. So why would you want to do an embedded database? The big thing is it doesn't require installation by your users. It's automatically there. It's included in your application. When they install your application, the database is there too. The database is only accessible within your application, so other applications aren't going to get into it, which is a great thing, especially for encryption and security purposes. The advantage of having a embedded database versus just some other data storage like a flat file is you have full SQL. It gives you much more flexibility to work with things, as well as better scalability to handle more data as your application gets more usage. It has caching and all the reliability, especially with InterBase, because it's self-tuning, and if it crashes, something happens, your application crashes, it recovers and continues on as if nothing happened. Now let's look at how to work with InterBase. So this is how you do the licensing and deployment for InterBase for both IB Lite and IB2Go, the embeddable versions. It's really quite easy and straightforward, but I wanted to spell it out and capture it here in this slide for easy reference. Once you've done it once, it's a breeze. First thing you need to do is install the redistributables, which you can do via Get. Just find InterBase 2017 to go. Then you go to reg.embarcadero.com, where you're going to enter your serial key, and that will give you your license file. Once you have your license file, you need to find the path to the IB redist folder. This is defined in your environment options in tools options. Usually it's the path you see there, but it could be different on your system, especially if you've created a user override. Once you've done this, that's the initial setup you have to do. To add it to your project, all you do is go to Project Deployment, click the Featured Files button, and select InterBase to go. Again, this is some screenshots for your reference. You see there in step 2, that's the IB redist folder, so that you can find the right folder to place your files, which you see in step 3. You've renamed them to reg_iblight.txt and reg_ib2go.txt, the two different license files you get. Once you've done that initial setup, step 4 is where you go in to add the featured files. You just click the little folder with the plus on it, and you see this dialog here, where you then select InterBase to go. And one important note is you only want to choose one file. So if you're only going to be using IB Lite, which is a great free option, then you probably don't even need to install the IB2Go registration file. But if you do want to test IB2Go or deploy IB2Go in production, you need that IB2Go file there. So you only want to check one. If you have both of them checked, it's not sure which to use. Check one, and you're good to go. When you're using FireDAC, there are two different drivers to use. One is for IB Lite, and the other is for the full InterBase desktop server or IB2Go. Those are the two different option screens you see for it there, depending on which driver you selected, IB Lite versus regular IB. IB Lite, because it has fewer features, has fewer options here for you to use as well. And now I'll hand it off to Mary Kelly so she can talk with you about change views.
Thanks, Jim. Now, I'm going to add some context on what InterBase change views are before we get into how change views are set up and used. Database applications that target mobile platforms require support between remote and mobile users, and it's considered critical that companies ensure access to the same information as quickly as possible. Now, change views are a really cool feature in InterBase 2017. We released them back with InterBase XE7 back in 2014. But being able to track your changes when you're scaling the number of users in your database tends to be a bit difficult or tricky with mobile incentives. When you embed InterBase into your mobile applications, you not only get to take advantage of the quick access to data that you would otherwise need to download every time you requested it, but you also have the ability to sync only your changes with a remote server and get back data that you specifically need accurate accounts of. With change views, you have this new method to work with that's a lot easier to develop and scale for your customer base. There isn't that overhead on existing transactions since you're keeping a very consistent view of any changed data that's observed by other transactions. So to get us started, what exactly is change views? Change views are a subscription-based model that are used to subscribe to some data and then identify what data has changed in the database. So you create a subscription that covers different tables and columns and allow or give users the rights to subscribe to those changes in the data. From the security perspective, there's no log tables or anything, so it's a very clean setup that tracks internally, so you don't have to worry about external files that everyone has access to, or something that someone could read or scan to find out information relating to changes or updates to your database. So only the people who are subscribed to those data changes can actually see the changes made available to you or for them. Subscriptions can run both during a connection and spanning a connection. So during a connection, you can get an alert and then just fetch the deltas. So if you were to fetch a few thousand or even a million or few million records, then get a message that says there have been changes to this table, you can use change views to go get the deltas instead of having to refresh the whole query over again. Now, this reduces the time and data movement over your network. And for spanning a connection, a really cool thing is that you don't actually have to be connected for it to record the changes. Once you start a database transaction, you can have a subscription set, then disconnect from your database, and then start a new connection with a new transaction at any future point in time. So for mobile devices, this is huge, as we don't always have our smartphones connected to the internet, especially if you're like me and use Wi-Fi so much that you forget to turn on your mobile data. Now, in today's world, we're pretty much always connected, but with carriers charging us more and getting less data packages, sometimes we don't really think about downloading a few thousand or even a few million records over our mobile plans and thinking, how much is this going to cost me to download these million records? And each subscriber can have multiple devices, so you can run a single user connected to the database, and then everyone else has this unique identifier for their subscribers, or each subscriber could have an ID for their phones, their laptops, etc. Now, to give you a little bit of an idea of what I mean, you may have seen this image before regarding InterBase and change views, but we can see here our typical or traditional briefcase model approach to what's happening with your data. When you make any changes, you have to fetch or get that data whenever you apply the updates. So as time goes on, you make changes, and when you make more and more changes, you have to go and fetch those new changes or deltas every time. So in this example, it's a one-way example, but if we intend on keeping our clients' caches up to date, then we can see that over time you end up pulling down a lot of data packets just to mirror your server. In this case, 23 packets. Now, using InterBase's change views, you can now identify specifically what deltas have changed, the field level. So using that, you only need to package and move the data that has actually changed. In this case, you have 9 changes that need to be moved, fetched, in that set period of time. You could think of this in terms of megabytes or gigabytes, and you know that it's faster to move 9 megabytes compared to 23 megabytes. Using a tracking system like Change Views provides you with the ability to set a list of changes like inserts, updates, and deletes that we made to the database from one point in time to another. So if you imagine that you have an Android user who connects to the central database and needs to bring their data up to date since the last time they were online. Without Change Views tracking, this user would have to fetch all the data from the central server and then merge that data with whatever changes they made with their copy of the database that's sitting on their device. Now, for phones and tablets, this creates a very inefficient environment since you may be moving around a lot and lose connection before the download completes, and then have to start all over again, especially if you're working with very large data sets where it can be resource intensive to a phone or tablet. To help avoid these kinds of issues, Change Views, unlike some other traditional databases, doesn't implement external logs and timestamp fields that can easily bloat your databases and impact the performance of your database by slowing down queries. Even worse, with mobile, is the concern for scalability once you reach hundreds or thousands of concurrent users. And with ChangeView tracking subscriptions, you can remove the necessity for time fields, log tables, and triggers. Since you're using SQL to create the subscriptions on your tables and columns, you're really as flexible as your SQL code. So once your subscription is set, you're using the same SQL statements to select the original data and the deltas. And it even goes back to fetch the changes that weren't passed in your subscription before activation, similar to a newsfeed relating to a particular subject of interest, where you get previous feeds all the way back to the beginning, no matter from where you start. A big problem with a standalone Briefcase model is that when you get the chance to sync with your server, you now have to deal with the probability that the data that you just collected may in fact be out of date, since without log tracking in place, it tends to be a hassle to know when the data was last updated on the client side or whether it's out of date. We have this subscription that allows you to subscribe to specific columns or all the columns that can span either a single or multiple tables. So you create the subscription to insert, delete, or update any changes. And once it's created, then you can either have one subscriber or multiple subscribers to the same subscription so that it collects their data based on the requirements to that subscription. People or devices can subscribe to whatever views you have available to them. So, like with mailing lists or Google Alerts, you can choose what content you want to receive alerts for or information on, and say, I want this email as it appears, so hourly or daily or weekly. And just like with Google Alerts, you can have multiple subscriptions that you can subscribe to. So each user can have multiple devices subscribed or can see a certain number of devices and then define those devices with a tracking ID like a GUID or a device identifier. Now, a fascinating feature of Change Views that I really like is that when you connect to your central database and you're posting your local changes, the next time you ask for those updates, you won't have the same changes sent back to you in the session. So this is really cool because unlike a transaction, we can actually span across a connection and you can sort of pick up where you left off and then ask what the changes are. And because you don't have additional logs, there's little impact on the database performance when you have a lot of devices connected. Let's head on into IB Console and check out a change view and how to set it up. I'm going to go ahead and show you this sample that I have of a change view subscription on the medicines database. Now, this database is actually included with RAD Studio in the samples that we ship, so you can go ahead and check out some change views yourself later. You can find it in the DBMS specific InterBase folder under the FireDAC samples. Now, this database has 3 tables, and I have a few columns that house the categories and info for the medicines in the list, along with a link list that connects the dots between which medicines and categories go where. As you can see in the metadata, these are just normal tables that show the definitions behind our tables where we have no triggers in place. To make this a change views explanation though, we have in the expanded tree panel for medicine.ib a view called subscriptions. And if I click on that view, then we can see that we already have a subscription created. So we're creating a subscription titled sub_medicines updates and setting that subscription on the categories medicine and medicine categories tables for inserts, deletes, and updates. So if there are any specific fields that I want to track, I can just add some brackets and state which fields I specifically want to manage. So this is really it for the syntax of creating a change view. So it's pretty simple. Of course, there's a lot more that can be done with a change view than just this, such as granting permissions. Now that the subscription has been created, I can grant permissions for the subscriptions to either specific users or a role, and then the said users can start with their subscriptions. So in our pharmacy database, I have the same tables, only I have a few more added in this one that I'm going to subscribe to the data so I can see what data is changing across the order, customer, and pharmacy tables. Without a doubt, embedded databases provide you with a secure way to keep your data on your devices and provide you with the fastest possible access to your table records. Adding change views only speeds up your development time without having to modify the underlying structure or your data. Embeddable databases offer the best of both worlds when deploying to mobile devices and can make a huge impact on your application. If you're looking for ways to reduce time associated with keeping your data up to date while still maintaining transparent security, then InterBase is really a cost-effective solution with a lightweight, fast, admin-free database where you can simply embed, deploy, and relax.
Fantastic. Thank you, Mary Kelly, for that on change views. Now it's time for questions and answers. So if you have any questions, put them in the question panel here in GoToWebinar, and we'll do our best to get them answered for you. If you're in the live session, if you're watching the replay, then you'll hear the recording of the questions we answered during the live session. I'll go ahead and put some resources up here for you that you might find useful in your working with InterBase. Mary Kelly, there's a question here about when you need to get a license, IB Lite deployment license.
Yeah, so IB Lite comes already with RAD Studio or Delphi C++ Builder when you download those. So you do actually get a license for IB Lite, which again is the free version. When you want to move beyond, not having change views or not having access to an encrypted database or anything like that, that's when you want to move into a to-go license, but you have that right kind of from the get-go.
So do you need to deploy the license file with IB Lite every time you use it, or is the license file only necessary for IB to go?
So the way that you would embed as you sort of discussed in there, the way that you embed your IB Lite into your application is actually just going into the project manager and in the IDE and including both the database file as well as the license file. And then from there, they actually kind of all package up and get distributed with the file. So that license key, it's just a big old block of text really that just activates and says, hey, you do have access to use this. So you wouldn't just embed it that way and then from there.
So can you put InterBase on Amazon Web Services or some other cloud system?
Yes, you can. Pretty much any place that you have access to hardware or some sort of area that can hold a database software, then you can put InterBase. So you can put it on a mobile phone, obviously. You can put it up in the cloud. You can put it on your on-prem databases as well, or servers as well. So anywhere you want.
So I put a link in here for the test or the license deployment process. It's on the slides. We'll have the slides published as well. But just in case you have any more questions on how to do that, I put the link there in for you.
Mm-hmm.
So InterBase is encrypted. The databases can be encrypted. Is it HIPAA compliant?
So I like to say that we enable you to be HIPAA compliant because of the fact that it's a database. We do have sort of a transparent encryption. So that means that not only is the data encrypted when it's actually in use, but it's also encrypted at rest. So specifically, if you're looking at to-go, the database itself, even it can't be accessed outside of your application. It's tied to your single application and only accessible through that. So your application can be, or you can enable HIPAA compliancy then. So if you do have a medical-based application, it doesn't take much to make that application HIPAA compliant, but we don't say that InterBase itself is HIPAA compliant.
Yeah, I don't know a lot about HIPAA compliance, but I think there's more to it than just having your data encrypted. It's kind of a whole process around it. So
Yeah.
if somebody doesn't have RAD Studio and they want to just get IB Lite, where can they get IB Lite from?
So IB Lite is specifically kind of tied to our IDE, and it's sort of, again, the free version that's delivered with our product, but you can get a download of a trial for InterBase to go, which again has pretty much the same capabilities, except you get change views, you get the encryption, and you also get some additional sort of syncing features enabled in that.
Is there an InterBase service similar to Microsoft SQL Azure?
Could I get some clarification on that? Or can we see if Tomas has some clarification on that?
Yeah. Not sure what you're asking there, Tomas. If you could clarify that, that'd be great. Question here about what HIPAA is. HIPAA is the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. It's a set of rules around the way medical records and such are treated and stored and stuff like that. So it's a specific policy or law, I guess, probably around the way health records are stored. So if you're not in healthcare, doesn't matter. It doesn't affect you. How does InterBase compare to Couchbase Lite as a mobile data solution?
So I will say I don't have as much experience with Couchbase Lite. Specifically, I can say that InterBase has the syncing capability, so you can move between a server to, or again, syncing between your device and a server. You have encryption pre-built in with access to, again, 256-bit encryption. So the data itself is always encrypted and you don't have to go and get any additional third-party components or anything like that, as you would with a lot of these other light kind of based like SQLite, and I'm not necessarily sure with Couchbase, but I can look into that a little bit for you there.
Okay. Yeah, I haven't looked at Couchbase for embedded. I know that so Couchbase is a document database typically, but
Yeah.
anyway. Can I create the IB Lite or to go database on the mobile device or have to deploy it?
So on mobile devices, you're going to have to deploy it. I mean, you can create or add all the data to a database from obviously your phone. So you don't have to connect it to a server or anything. It can run in a standalone environment. But in terms of actually creating sort of the database itself, sort of on the fly, if you will, I know I've seen it done on Macs, but I have yet to see it done on a mobile device.
Yeah, believe so. I know that when in the connection set, properties, you can change by default what is it? Let me look real quick. There's a property called open mode, and it defaults to open. And if you change that from open to open or create, then it should, in theory, create the database file when it first goes to use it. I've done that on a desktop, but it should work the same way on mobile. They're in both IB Lite and regular IB. Once it creates the database, though, you're going to have to set it all up correctly, and put all your tables and stuff like that, which you can use the FD script components to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so Thomas is saying that the SQL or Microsoft SQL Azure means you don't have to deal with the server, just the database. So if you just want to deal with the database, that would be possibly like what you do with a embedded, or unless it's being managed for you remotely, then you can set up somewhere there's a database running or server running, I guess. Unless it's embedded. If it's embedded, then you don't have a server running. It's just part of your application.
Yeah.
How is the IB2Go license cost model? That's a good question, Mary Kelly.
So out of the box, a single to-go license costs $64, but you can purchase it in packs. But the big thing to remember too is that if you want to distribute to, for instance, if your organization wants to distribute licenses to your customers, so you want to embed InterBase into an application and then sort of distribute that application across maybe, the Android Play Store or the iOS Store, then what you have to do is actually come to us about a VAR agreement, which is essentially just a value-added reseller where we give you sort of a super key file where you, instead of having to go out and insert into each application the distributed kind of license file, we give you the super key that you deploy once and then essentially just report back to us how that works. But again, it's the model is basically, if you want a single to-go license, it's $64, and then from there it kind of scales up to either a 20-pack or a 100-user pack, and those kind of decrease from 64 to about 40 per license to about 20 per license for the 100-pack. And if you have any questions about VAR agreements or anything like that, or becoming a VAR, you can reach out to me and I can put you in contact with the representative for your area.
So there's a question here about how much larger the application gets when you embed IB Lite.
So it depends on how much data you're storing. InterBase at its smallest can be a few kilobytes, but since it's not actually working as a separate process to the database and it's deeply embedded into the application, that's again just going to be based off the amount of storage that you use or that you have in the database. So if, for instance, you're worried about application size, something that you can do is using change views, for instance. And what that'll basically do is keep those changes synced, where instead of you bloating your file or bloating your application with, sort of log tables or files or additional material that you actually don't need, tables within the database that are storing this additional information, you won't have those. So the application is, again, sort of dependent upon how much data you'll actually be storing on the device and syncing back and forth.
Yeah, and I was just looking here at at least on Android, the shared library file is 25 megabytes that you embed into your application for that. So, yeah, I know that when I messed with it, like you were saying, that the overhead of the database file itself is pretty small, just a few kilobytes.
Yeah.
But then it looks like 25 megs for the shared library, at least on Android. I would assume it's similar on other platforms. If you are connected with a mobile device to InterBase server and you lose connection, what's going to happen to the app?
So if you have InterBase, are you meaning that you have InterBase connected, or I'm sorry, that you don't have a database embedded, or that you have a database embedded? If it's embedded, then the data is on the device. If it's not, then it's the same process that you would follow if your Oracle or SQL Server instance disconnected from the internet, basically. And so I guess it sort of depends on which instance. Embedded, the data is still there, absolutely nothing happens to the application, which is why an embedded database is typically a good solution for if you do believe that your application could lose access to the internet. But if you're just connected to an InterBase server, the data will be there until you attempt to make a new fetch. So if you're trying to fetch new data, then it'll essentially just kind of sit there and spin and wait until it can connect back up to the internet.
So that like you said, it's a good reason to have your embedded database and using change views so that you keep the data you want local. And that way, if you lose a connection to the server, it's all still working there.
Yeah.
Perfect. Is it possible and or feasible to use IB Lite or IB to Go with Visual Studio and C#?
Yes. So it is possible to use to go, for instance, with Visual Studio. We do have some customers that actually do use InterBase with Visual Studio. It's, again, sort of, just the process of embedding the embedding the database into the application. When you're embedding the database doesn't necessarily it sits in a directory sort of table or folder for either Android or iOS. I know on Android, it's just the internal sort of folder that you have, and then it's essentially just whatever the title of your database is .ib. So it doesn't, so it's essentially just saying, only this specific application has access to this database. So yes, you could use Visual Studio with an InterBase license. So
Does InterBase have collision management? If yes, how does it solve collisions?
so I guess I will say I don't necessarily know as much about collision management, but if you send me a message, I can see if there's something specific to how InterBase could handle, or if it does manage collision management.
Okay. And your email is mary.kelly@embarcadero.com.
Yes, it is.
John's asking, where is the IB data file kept on PCs on Android? Is it a central database or can it hold data private to a specific user?
So it can hold data specific to a private user. So for instance, like I said with Android, it's kept in the internal, uh, essentially just the folder that's called internal. And again, it can only be accessed by that single application. So unless somebody has, the password maybe to your application within IB Console, you can actually set it up so that you have this embedded user sort of what's the word? EUA, so an embedded sort of user agreement where someone has to specifically log in to actually access the database or at all. So if you've built your application, you can actually then say that you want to prompt for a login every single time. So the data is always secure from that standpoint. And then so yes, it can hold data private to a specific user. Using that, it's essentially just this embedded user and password. So for a PC, you can you choose the location of where you want a database to be held. So if you want it to access a specific folder or file or be located in a specific region, as long as you have the right on their machine, sort of as like an administrator to put a file somewhere, then you can put it there and it's not going to affect anything. So again, it's specific to each installation for your application.
Okay, great. And another question here: is there a way to get IB Lite if you haven't purchased RAD Studio, Delphi, or C++ Builder? Can you get an IB Lite serial number? Or is that only available to people that have the IDE?
It's only available with the IDE. To Go is the version that you would use that's external and can be used with anything else.
Okay. When syncing change views, is the data compressed and encrypted, or is it sent and received as raw data over the wire?
So you can sort of choose the method of sending and receiving data. So you can either set it from your application or even in InterBase. So the data essentially, like I said, it just kind of gets passed as data packets. So however your application handles packets from, if they're compressed or not, or just raw, all that data then will get shipped in that process. So it's really up to you.
Okay. And then what is it you do to activate or call a change view within your application? Do you just reopen the query and it only gives you the data that's changed, or how exactly does that work?
So that's actually pretty much accurate. Once you've set the subscription, you essentially are just saying, hey, this subscription is accurate, it's up to date, and everything's kind of, working. Then yes, it's basically just rerunning your application and you're getting the data that changes. Because it's set up from the server, everything that kind of gets passed back and forth through the server and the application, and since it runs sort of externally and doesn't affect the database at all when from the server perspective, then yeah, basically it's as simple as 1, 2, 3. It's actually really cool. So as long as data's been committed, or as long as the activation for the subscription is active, then everything works and you don't really have to do anything new.
The question here, David's asking, do you have any sample apps that show IB Lite working with a cloud-based InterBase server? Now, I believe you would need to be using IB to go if you're connecting syncing between a embedded database and a remote database, right? You can't do that with IB Lite.
Yeah. So you can do some sort of syncing, but you won't have anything that's similar to like change views. So yes, I would say use IB to go to sync with an InterBase server.
Okay, and we do have samples with that ship with RAD Studio.
Yeah, we've got IB Lite samples. We don't have them pre-configured to set up to a server that's, working in a cloud. But if you grab a trial download of a server, you essentially have full functionality with 20 users connected. So if you happen to, you can deploy your IB Lite application or one of the sample apps, just take a copy of that database and sync it to put it on a server somewhere, and you can test it out. And it's a pretty simple and easy process to do.
So, someone you're saying that they're on update subscription and they did not get an IB Lite 2017 serial. So they probably need to. Who should they talk to about that?
So they should be able to it's either going to be tech support, or if you reach out to licensing, they'll be able to tell you where to get the update or where to get your new serial key for IB Lite 2017.
Oh yeah, I guess that's true if they had, since that's a newer one. Yeah, so that is one we're shipping now. So you would have to, contact licensing or support.
Mm-hmm.
Good point. It looks like I'm just going back through to see if I missed anything here. It looks like we've gotten through all the questions. Anything else you wanted to add before we wrap it up here?
Nothing necessarily here. Just, if you have any questions, definitely reach out and we'll do our best to answer them.
Okay, I think that's it. All right, fantastic. Thanks everybody for joining us, and we look forward to seeing all the great applications you're going to build with embedded IB Lite or IB2Go databases, and all the data you're going to save in transmission by using change views. So thanks for joining us, and we will talk to you later. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.